It all started exactly 22 days ago. I was sitting in my best friend Lisa's living room, scrolling through my phone while she lay on the couch, wrapped in a blanket and barely moving. She had been sick for a few days, and honestly I was starting to get really worried. She's always the energetic one, always out and about, and here she was, pale and exhausted. At first, I tried to make her feel better by offering her some water, bringing her soup, and telling her stories to lift her mood. But as the day went on, it became obvious she wasn't improving. In fact, she started saying things like, "I can't take it anymore," which instantly made my heart skip a beat. I didn't know what was going on, but I knew something was wrong. I didn't hesitate. I called an ambulance right away, feeling a surge of panic flood me. I couldn't believe I was doing this, standing there as the sirens got closer, trying to keep my composure while Lisa lay there, barely able to sit up. The paramedics rushed in and took her to the hospital, and I followed right behind, trying to keep my tears in check. Lisa was in good hands, I knew, but the fear of the unknown had me feeling helpless. Thankfully, after some blood tests and an the doctors confirmed that she just had the flu. They reassured me that she'd be fine after some rest and fluids. I was so relieved, but the whole night felt like a blur. I didn't leave her side, not even when she slept. I just sat by her, listening to the beeping of the hospital machines, trying to shake off the anxiety that had gripped me since I made that emergency call. The next morning, after I made sure she was stable and comfortable, I went home briefly to take care of my French bulldog Winston. He always seems to know when I'm feeling stressed, and seeing his wagging tail made me feel a little more grounded. I quickly gave him some food, and then I rushed to the store to buy some fresh fruits, snacks, and sweets for Lisa. I wanted to cheer her up, help her feel better in a way that didn't involve a hospital bed. I drove back to Lisa's place, carrying the bags of fruit and snacks, feeling like I was doing something good for her. But when I walked through her door, everything felt different. The atmosphere had shifted. Lisa's room, which had been quiet and calm the night before, was now filled with new faces. I paused in the doorway, surprised to see two guys standing there. Brian, who I knew from mutual friends, and Kevin, who was clearly a little out of place. Lisa had been texting Brian and Kevin during the night, and I guess they must have come by to check in on her. When I walked into her room, I felt the familiar tension in the air. Lisa, who had always been shy, looked a little uncomfortable, trying to hide it behind a forced smile. I could tell she wasn't thrilled about having these strangers around, but I understood. She'd wanted the company to distract her, but now it was almost like she was regretting the decision. It wasn't that she didn't like them, it was just that she was really private, and having to share a hospital experience with a bunch of people made her uneasy. Still, I did my best to ease the tension. I opened the bags of snacks and started talking to Brian and Kevin, trying to make Lisa feel more at ease. We laughed about random things, and at some point I noticed how much Lisa had warmed up to the guys. She was laughing more, her usual smile returning to her face. I realized she was enjoying this interaction more than she let on, but I also noticed something else. There was a certain vibe between them. Something subtle. Maybe it was just me, but it felt like Lisa was paying more attention to them than to me, and it was almost like a weight had lifted off her shoulders. I didn't mind. After all, I was there to help her feel better. But I began to wonder. Had I crossed a line by staying for so long? Was I supposed to just let them enjoy their time alone, especially now that Lisa was starting to perk up? As 6 p.m. approached, I knew it was time to go home. I needed to take care of some things like feeding Winston again and taking a short break. Lisa seemed content, so I hugged her goodbye and told her I'd see her tomorrow. But when I walked out of her room, I felt something strange, a strange mix of guilt and curiosity. Something about the entire situation had changed, and I wasn't sure what it was, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. I drove home, trying to distract myself with music. But the thought of Lisa with these two guys, laughing and joking like they had known each other forever, wouldn't leave my mind. It wasn't that I was jealous or upset. I just couldn't shake the feeling that something was different now. It felt like I had left her in a place where the dynamics were shifting, and it had caught me off guard. That night I went to bed early, hoping I could get some rest. But all I could think about was Lisa and Brian and Kevin. I thought about the way she'd smiled at them, the way she'd seemed so at ease when I left. I had no idea at the time that this would be the beginning of something that would turn everything upside down. The morning after everything that had happened, I woke up with a new sense of determination. Lisa had been through so much already, and I knew the hospital food wasn't helping her feel better. She hated how bland and unappetizing it all was. So I decided to cook for her. I made one of her favorite dishes, something comforting and hearty that I knew she'd enjoy. I couldn't wait to see her smile when I handed it to her, hoping it would brighten her spirits even more. First, I took care of Winston, my French bulldog. I fed him, made sure he was comfortable, and then rushed out the door to head to the hospital. I couldn't stop thinking about Lisa. Was she really feeling better? Was she still struggling? I thought about how much had changed in such a short time. My mind wandered, and for a moment, I found myself wondering if I had done the right thing by sticking around, by becoming so involved. When I got to the hospital, I was met by the usual sterile smells and the soft, constant beeping of machines. But something was off this time. There was a strange, almost metallic scent in the air, but I dismissed it quickly. I was too focused on seeing Lisa and making sure she was okay. I walked into her room, and I could immediately tell something had changed. Lisa was sitting up in bed, looking more vibrant than I'd seen her in days. Her face had color, and the tiredness that had once dominated her features was slowly being replaced by a bright, almost radiant smile. She beamed when she saw me walk in, and I couldn't help but feel a weight lift off my shoulders. "You're looking so much better," I said, walking over to her and setting down the food I'd brought. She hugged me, and it felt like a huge relief, like she was finally back to her old self. "I feel amazing," she replied, her voice full of energy. She was practically glowing. I couldn't believe how much she'd improved in just one night. We sat there for a while, eating and chatting, talking about everything from what had happened during the night to the silly gossip we used to share. It felt so good to be laughing again, just like old times. But while we were laughing, I noticed the two guys, Brian and Kevin, were stepping out of the room. They seemed like they were heading to the procedure area, and their demeanor was different than it had been the night before. "What do you think they're doing?" I asked, raising an eyebrow, a playful grin on my face. Lisa smirked, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "Probably an enema," she said, and we both burst out laughing. I couldn't help but giggle at the thought of these grown men going through something so, well, embarrassing. It was almost too funny, and I could tell that Lisa had picked up on it too. Her sense of humor was back in full force, and I was grateful to see it. As we continued to chat, Lisa's face suddenly turned a little more serious. She hesitated for a moment, then spoke softly. "I've been thinking a lot about Brian." I raised my eyebrows, sensing a shift in her mood. "Oh, what about him?" Lisa took a deep breath, as if trying to find the right words. I think I'm falling for him. I don't know how to explain it, but every time I see him I just feel happy. I don't want to be without him." She looked at me with a mix of excitement and confusion, as if she couldn't believe how deeply she was feeling about him. To be honest, I felt the same way about Brian. He was undeniably attractive, with a confidence that radiated even in the way he held himself. But there was something about him that made me think he was out of my league. I wasn't sure what it was, but I had that nagging feeling that I couldn't compete with the energy he and Lisa shared. I had been quiet for a moment, just taking it all in. But then something wild crossed my mind. And without thinking, I blurted it out. "What if we had a swing party? Right here in this room?" The words left my mouth before I could stop them, and I instantly felt a surge of regret. What was I even saying? Lisa's eyes widened, her face flushing red. "No way," she replied, shaking her head so quickly that her hair flew around her shoulders. "I don't want to do anything like that. That's not me." I felt a wave of disappointment flood me, but I couldn't help but push a little more. "Come on, I can see how much you like him. Could be fun and no one would have to know. Just a little harmless fun." I could tell by her expression that she wasn't convinced. She bit her lip, but she was shaking her head again, clearly uncomfortable with the idea. She glanced nervously at the door, as if she expected Brian and Kevin to walk back in at any moment. Just then they did. Brian and Kevin entered the room, looking relaxed after whatever procedure they'd gone through. But the moment Brian looked at Lisa, I saw something that made me take a step back. Lisa blushed, her cheeks turning an even deeper shade of red, and she immediately looked away from him. The room felt charged with tension, and I could see Lisa trying to shake off what I had just suggested. She kept her eyes on the floor, her hands fiddling with the edge of her blanket. Kevin, sensing the shift in mood, gave a small chuckle and said something about the procedure they'd just gone through, but it barely registered. All I could think about was how uncomfortable Lisa seemed, and I instantly regretted pushing her. She wasn't ready for this, and I could see that now. So, here's the part one never expected to write. As much as I had pushed the idea of the swing party to Lisa, I was honestly just trying to be playful, to lighten the mood, and maybe even distract her from the gravity of everything happening around us. But when I suggested it to Brian and Kevin, well, I didn't think they'd be so quick to agree. I looked at them, almost expecting them to laugh or joke it off, but they didn't. Instead, they exchanged a glance, and Brian grinned like this was something totally normal. "Right here?" he asked, eyebrow raised in curiosity. I nodded, still in that ridiculous mindset where I just wanted to see if I could make this happen. "Yeah, why not? We can just have a little fun, no big deal." Without hesitation, Kevin chimed in, his voice casual, almost like he was agreeing to attend a regular gathering. "Oh, this will be a cool experience," he said with a smile, as if we weren't standing in a hospital room, just an hour after Lisa had been receiving medical treatment. Lisa, on the other hand, was a total contradiction. Her face flushed with embarrassment at the idea, and she kept looking away, clearly unsure. But as soon as they agreed, I noticed a change in her. Her eyes flickered with interest, and she was suddenly more alert, her earlier hesitation melting away. I couldn't help but notice how her mood shifted almost instantly. It was like the moment Brian and Kevin gave the green light, something clicked in her. The color in her cheeks deepened, and I could see a spark in her eyes that wasn't there before. It was clear to me now, she was intrigued. We closed the door, shutting ourselves off from the rest of the world. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. It was just us. The four of us. I didn't know how I had gotten here. How a silly suggestion had turned into something that felt so real. It was only supposed to be a joke. But now, as I look back, I see how much I ignored. The fact that I didn't even know what medical conditions Brian and Kevin were here for in the first place. But that never crossed my mind at the time. My only thought was the idea of having a fun experience. I was so focused on the party, on making something happen, that the rest didn't even matter. I guess it was my biggest mistake. Anyway, as things unfolded, the night went on without any hiccups at first. There was no awkwardness, no discomfort, just a sense of excitement. We all relaxed into the moment, and it seemed like the kind of carefree fun I'd imagined. I wish I could say everything went smoothly, but that's not exactly the case. After we were done, I felt this sudden wave of nausea wash over me. At first, I thought it was just because I'd been running on adrenaline for too long, and maybe the excitement of it all had gotten to me. I could feel the sweat on my skin, and I figured it must be the physical exertion. I needed to lie down for a bit, clear my head. Lisa was feeling the same way. She laid down next to me on the bed, and we both just rested, trying to recover from what had just happened. I figured we'd both be fine soon enough. It was nothing too serious, I convinced myself. Just a little tiredness, a little overwhelm. But as I laid there, I began to feel more and more off. First it was just dizziness. Then it was a kind of heaviness in my chest that didn't seem to go away. My head felt cloudy, and I couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong. Lisa had the same look in her eyes. She was holding her stomach, and her face was pale. I stayed in that bed for almost an hour, just lying there, thinking it would pass. I kept telling myself that the exhaustion from the night, the emotional roller coaster we'd been on, was what had us both feeling this way. It wasn't until much later that I realized, What we were feeling wasn't just fatigue. It was the first sign of something far worse. But at that moment, I didn't know any better. All I could think was how uncomfortable I was feeling, and how I couldn't seem to shake the sickness that had settled in my body. Eventually, after what felt like forever, I stood up and decided it was time to leave. Lisa insisted she was okay, but I could see the unease in her face as she tried to muster up the energy to sit up. We said our goodbyes and I left the hospital still feeling queasy. I thought a bit of fresh air would help. But little did I know, the worst was yet to come. The next day, I woke up feeling absolutely awful. My head was pounding, my body felt heavy, and there was a constant gnawing sickness in my stomach. I tried to shake it off at first, thinking maybe I was just overtired from the night before, but soon enough I started vomiting. It wasn't just nausea anymore. It was a full-on physical reaction, and it scared me. When I tried to go to the bathroom, I felt this intense burning sensation, something I had never experienced before. My heart raced, my throat tightened in panic, and I couldn't shake the thought that something was seriously wrong. And then I realized Lisa was going through the exact same thing. She was in her bathroom too, looking pale and just as shaken as I felt. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just exhaustion or a side effect of the night. It was something much worse. I was terrified. Terrified for myself and terrified for Lisa. I didn't know what was happening, but I had a gut feeling that this was going to be bad. Without even thinking, I called Lisa and told her I was coming over. We needed to go to the hospital. When we arrived, we were both a mess. We barely even spoke as we waited, our bodies aching with the same burning sensation, both of us too embarrassed and afraid to even look each other in the eye. I felt so ashamed, like somehow I had brought this on us. When the doctor finally came in to check us, they quickly diagnosed us both with urinary tract infections, UTIs. I couldn't even process it at first. A part of me was in disbelief. UTIs? Really? I started crying right there in the hospital. It felt like everything was crashing down and I couldn't stop myself. I blamed Brian and Kevin, even though deep down I knew I had made the choice to go through with it. But I couldn't help but feel angry and betrayed by them. This whole mess was their fault too, wasn't it? Lisa was silent, sitting next to me, her face pale with both fear and regret. We didn't talk about what had happened with Brian and Kevin after that. There was no point. We were both so overwhelmed with what was going on inside us and the fear of what this could mean. We had no one else to turn to except each other, and I think in that moment, both of us wished we could turn back time. When Lisa was discharged later that day, I went home feeling worse than ever. I sat down on my couch, still in shock, still processing what had happened. I felt like such an idiot, like I had brought all of this upon myself. The treatment for a UTI wasn't easy. It was uncomfortable, and I knew I had a long road ahead of me. But the emotional weight of it was even harder to bear. I regretted everything I had done, the suggestion, the impulsiveness, the decision to push Lisa into something she didn't want to do. It wasn't just about the physical pain. It was about the way I had acted. I never thought about the consequences, about what could go wrong. I never stopped to think about our health or the reality of the situation. The next day, I started the antibiotics, trying to take care of myself and hoping I could heal. I could hardly bring myself to look in the mirror. I felt like a completely different person. The guilt, the regret, it was eating me alive. I couldn't even bring myself to text Brian or Kevin. What was there to say? How could I even face them after what had happened? All I could think about was how much I wished I could undo it all. If I had only stopped myself, if I had listened to that voice inside that told me this was a bad idea from the beginning. But now, here I was, dealing with something I never thought I'd have to face, and Lisa was in the same boat. I'll tell you this much. I regret it. I regret it deeply. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that these kinds of decisions are not harmless. The consequences are real. Health-wise, emotionally, and mentally, this was a mistake I'll never forget. I'm writing this to share my story, not for sympathy, but so that you can learn from my mistakes. Please don't even think about making the same choice. It's not worth it. I wish I had thought things through. I wish I had understood the potential risks, not just physically but emotionally. The shame, the guilt, the pain. It wasn't worth the few moments of excitement I thought we would have. So to anyone reading this, don't make the same mistakes I did. It's not a joke. It's not an adventure. It's real, and it's far more dangerous than you think.